World Cup is here, right? But according to these recent reports, the celebratory spirit of this massive global tournament is running straight into the harsh reality of United States border policies. It's a story of stark contrasts. The source material we're looking at today paints this vivid picture of a country that actively campaigned to host the world, but is allegedly treating its global guests like suspects. The data and the personal accounts in this text are eye-opening, so we're going to break it all down step by step to see exactly what's actually happening on the ground. So here is our quick roadmap for today. We'll start with the expectation versus the reality, then we'll look at the severe treatment of elite athletes, pivot over to these staggering visa rejection data for everyday fans, examine the extreme security logistics and political rhetoric, and finally wrap up with the broader global scrutiny this is all drawing. All right, Section 1, the expectation versus the reality, a tale of two hosts. Let's set the stage with the big overarching paradox presented by our author. The source material draws this incredibly visceral contrast between the two neighboring host nations. When arriving teams land in Mexico, they are greeted with mariachi bands and a hero's welcome. I mean, that's exactly the kind of giant international celebration you expect from the World Cup, right? But America's response? It's characterized not as a party, but basically as a severe checkpoint. Instead of music, arriving teams are facing tarmac searches. Their bags are being pulled. They're met with severe security measures. It is a complete 180 from your traditional host nation welcome. Moving to Section 2. Athletes and officials stopped. Elite treatment at the gate. You might be thinking, surely top-tier, internationally recognized sports figures get to bypass these hurdles, right? Well, the source text details specific accounts proving otherwise. Let's look at the incredible case of Omar Artan. He isn't just a fan, he's literally Africa's #1 award-winning FIFA-appointed referee. The text explains that he flew into Miami after a stopover in Turkey. He successfully made it all the way onto United States soil. And then he was immediately sent back. No hearing, no appeal. Just boom, immediate deportation. And the source claims the sole reason for this drastic action was the simple fact that he holds a Somali passport. The door was just slammed right in his face, completely ignoring his elite status in the tournament. And Artan's experience? Not an isolated incident. Consider what allegedly happened to the Senegalese national team. We're talking about elite athletes representing their entire country on the world stage. Yet upon landing, the text details a pretty shocking reception. We're talking a full tarmac search, bags pulled and heavily inspected, players forced to take off their shoes, and, most severely, subjected to cavity searches. The text explicitly points out the irony here. These elite professionals arrived to compete, but they were treated entirely like suspects right at the gate. 7. I want you to just think about that number. That is the number of hours highlighted in our source material regarding the Iraqi national team. Look, Iraq is making its first World Cup appearance in 40 years. That is a massive milestone. Yet when their star striker, Aymen Hussein, arrived at Chicago's O'Hare Airport for a pre-tournament friendly, he wasn't, ushered to a nice hotel. He was held for nearly 7 hours of interrogation. And for the Iraqi team's supporting staff, it was actually even worse. The text notes that the Iraqi team photographer was denied entry outright by U.S. Customs and Border Protection. The only reason they were given was a super vague reference to vetting concerns with absolutely zero further details provided. They just simply weren't allowed in. All right, Section 3, the visa rejection reality, the fan's journey. We've seen how the athletes and officials are being treated, but let's shift gears to the everyday international fans who are just trying to support their teams. To truly understand these systemic hurdles, the source humanizes the data with the story of an Iraqi fan named Abdullah. Imagine doing all this. After legitimately buying his World Cup tickets, logistical hurdles forced him to physically travel to Jordan just to find an embassy to process his visa. When that didn't work out, he traveled to Turkey to try again. After all that travel, all that expense across multiple countries, the answer was still no. His visa was ultimately denied. And the crazy part is, Abdullah is not an outlier. The numbers provided in the report are just staggering, highlighting a really stark disparity in rejection rates for visitors from specific nations. Countries like Senegal, Ghana, Algeria, Pakistan, Egypt, Jordan, and Ecuador, they're facing an over 40% visa rejection rate for this tournament. To put that in perspective, nearly half of the fans from those nations are being turned away. And for others, it escalates to outright entry bans, nations like Iran, Haiti, Ivory Coast, and Senegal. The source argues that these systemic rejections fundamentally undermine the whole global nature of the event. Section 4. Extreme security and rhetoric, the Iranian team's situation. Let's see how this builds into what the source describes as absolute absurdity, heavily influenced by political rhetoric. The text details this incredibly specific and extreme logistical nightmare for the Iranian football team. They have 3 official games scheduled to be played on U.S. soil. But they are not actually allowed to stay overnight in the United States. According to the report, the entire team is sleeping in Tijuana, Mexico, and literally crossing the international border strictly for game day, leaving immediately after the match concludes. On top of that, their coaches, managers, and technical staff were denied entry entirely. So why is this happening? Well, the text points directly to the charged political atmosphere surrounding the tournament, suggesting that political biases are basically interfering with the spirit of the games. The source reports that right-wing groups aligned with Marco Rubio are publicly framing the Iranian football team as, quote, a weapon of mass distraction and a nuclear threat. It perfectly illustrates this direct collision of international sports and intense domestic political framing, which the text argues is heavily impacting the entire tournament. Section 5. When cameras are pointed, the global scrutiny. This brings us to the core critique and the ultimate conclusion drawn by the author of our source text. This whole situation reveals a deep, deep contradiction at the heart of this report. The United States actively campaigned for and won the right to host the most-watched sporting event on the planet. That was a deliberate choice to invite the world in. Yet, the reality that actually followed includes cavity searches for elite athletes, 7-hour interrogations for arriving players, and mass visa denials for excited fans. The text strongly critiques the U.S. government for essentially transforming a massive global celebration into a stringent, exclusionary checkpoint. Which leaves us with this final, incredibly provocative thought presented by the author. If this is how the United States treats the world when every single camera on the planet is pointed at it, what does it do when they're not? It is such a powerful question about visibility, security, and how a nation welcomes or restricts its guests. The world is indeed watching. Take a moment to just sit with that question. Drop your thoughts in the comments below, share this explainer with someone who really needs to see this data,